The galaxy believed its laws could restrain humanity, until the day they pushed us too far and discovered what happens when Deathworlders stop playing by the rules. Part 1: The Forgotten Protocol. Stellar Accord had maintained peace across the galaxy for 15,000 years. It was a vast network of laws and agreements that connected 923 different species across countless star systems. The system was built on one simple idea. Every species deserved protection under the law. Every dispute could be solved through negotiation. Every conflict had a peaceful solution if you looked hard enough. The Accord was managed by the Galactic Arbiters. These were beings of immense age and wisdom. They came from the first species to achieve interstellar travel. Their job was to interpret the laws and settle disagreements between species. They had done this work for so long that most species trusted them completely. When the Arbiters made a decision, that decision was final. No one questioned their judgment. Humanity joined the Stellar Accord 50 years ago. They were newcomers in a galaxy filled with ancient civilizations. Some species had been traveling between stars for millions of years. Humans had only just learned how to fold space and reach distant worlds. They were like children taking their first steps in a room full of adults. Most species viewed humanity with mild curiosity. These humans were energetic and ambitious. They asked many questions. They learned quickly. They built colonies on empty worlds and established trade routes with neighboring systems. They followed the rules carefully. They caused no major problems. They seemed grateful to be part of something larger than themselves. The Kryn Empire was different. They were one of the founding members of the Stellar Accord. They had helped write many of the original laws 15,000 years ago. Their civilization was ancient and powerful. They controlled 200 star systems and commanded fleets that numbered in the thousands. The Kryn were tall beings with crystalline skin that reflected light in strange patterns. They were proud of their history and their achievements. The Kryn had always been skilled at finding advantages within the law. Their legal scholars studied every treaty and every agreement. They looked for small gaps and unclear phrases. Over thousands of years, they had used these discoveries to expand their territory and increase their wealth. Other species knew about this, but the advantages were usually small. A mining colony here, a trading station there. Nothing worth starting a conflict over. Then the Kryn Legal Council discovered something interesting in the ancient texts. There was a clause written 12,000 years ago. It dealt with territorial claims and newly explored regions. The clause said that any world left uninhabited for more than 60 standard years could be reclaimed by any Accord member. The original intent was simple. It prevented species from claiming vast territories they could not actually use, but the Kryn lawyers found a loophole. The clause defined inhabited as having permanent registered settlements with the Galactic Arbiters. If a colony was never properly registered in the central database, it technically did not exist under Accord law. The Kryn spent months searching through registration records. They found what they were looking for. Meridian Falls was a human colony world in the outer regions. It was a beautiful planet with vast forests and clean oceans. Mountains rose up to touch clouds of white and gold. Rivers carved paths through valleys where human settlements had grown over 40 years. 4.7 million humans called Meridian Falls their home. They had built cities and farms. They had schools and hospitals. They had created lives filled with hope and purpose. The problem was simple. When humanity first joined the Stellar Accord, they did not understand all the registration requirements. The paperwork for Meridian Falls had been filed with the wrong department. A minor administrative error. A box checked in the wrong place. The kind of mistake that seemed harmless at the time. The Kryn Empire filed a formal claim with the Galactic Arbiters. They argued that Meridian Falls was technically unregistered territory. They argued that the 60-year clause applied. They argued that under Accord law, they had the right to claim the planet for themselves. The Arbiters reviewed the case for 3 weeks. Representatives from dozens of species watched the proceedings. Some felt uncomfortable with the Kryn argument. It seemed to violate the spirit of the law even if it followed the exact words. But The arbiters had always ruled based on precise legal interpretation. That was their job. That was how the system worked. The ruling came on a cold morning in their court chambers. The lead arbiter announced that the Kryn claim was legally valid. Meridian Falls would be transferred to Kryn control. The human colonists had 90 days to evacuate. They could take personal possessions, but all buildings and infrastructure would become Kryn property. Ambassador Marcus Chen represented humanity in the accord. He was a man of 60 years with gray hair and tired eyes. He had spent his entire life building relationships with alien species. He believed in diplomacy. He believed in law. He believed that civilization was better than chaos. He stood in the chamber as the verdict was announced. His face showed no emotion. He requested permission to speak. The arbiters granted it. Ambassador Chen asked if there was any appeal process. The lead arbiter explained that arbiter decisions were final under accord law. Ambassador Chen asked if humanitarian concerns could override legal technicalities. The lead arbiter said that law must be applied consistently or it meant nothing. Ambassador Chen nodded slowly. He thanked the arbiters for their time. His voice was calm and professional. Then he said something that made several species feel suddenly uneasy. Then the law has failed my people. We will remember this. He turned and walked out of the chamber. His footsteps echoed in the silence. He did not look back. The evacuation of Meridian Falls began the next week. Human ships arrived to transport 4.7 million people away from their homes. Families packed what they could carry. Children asked why they had to leave. Parents had no good answers. The Kryn fleet waited in orbit, patient and certain of their legal victory. Within 90 days, Meridian Falls was empty. The city still stood. The farms were still planted. The schools still had books on shelves. But every human was gone. They scattered across dozens of worlds. Refugees in a galaxy that had failed to protect them. Ambassador Chen sent one final message to the Stellar Accord. It was brief. Humanity withdraws from all council sessions and diplomatic functions until further notice. We require time to reconsider our place in this community. Then humanity went silent. Every human embassy closed. Every diplomatic channel stopped responding. Every human representative left the Accord facilities and returned to human space. Within days, it was as if humanity had simply vanished from galactic affairs. Most species assumed this was an emotional reaction. The humans were upset. They needed time to accept what had happened. Eventually, they would return with requests for compensation or assistance. The Kryn might even offer some symbolic gesture to ease tensions. Things would return to normal. Months passed. Humanity remained silent. The galaxy moved on to other matters. There were trade agreements to negotiate, border disputes to settle. The Stellar Accord had governed hundreds of species for thousands of years. One small race going quiet was barely worth noticing. But behind the wall of silence, something was happening. Something the galaxy had never seen before. Something that would change everything. Humanity was not grieving. Humanity was preparing. The silent transformation 2 years passed in complete silence. Human space became a mystery to the rest of the galaxy. Ships that approached the borders were turned away with polite but firm messages. No exceptions were made. No explanations were given. The automated responses always said the same thing. Human territory is currently closed to external traffic. Please respect our boundaries. Departure is required immediately. The other species tried various approaches to break through the silence. The Veshan Collective sent diplomats who had been friends with human ambassadors. They were turned away. The Valorian Trade Guild offered lucrative contracts and partnerships. They received no response. Even the Galactic Arbiters sent official delegations requesting dialogue. Every attempt failed. Humanity had closed its doors to the entire galaxy. Some species became concerned. What were the humans doing behind those borders? The Kryn Empire laughed at these worries. They told anyone who would listen that humanity had learned its place. The young species had challenged their betters and lost. Now they were hiding in shame. This was natural. This was how the strong taught the weak. The Kryn believed their own words completely. A few species were not so certain. They monitored human space as carefully as they could. They noticed strange things. Energy signatures that made no sense. Massive power fluctuations that appeared and disappeared without explanation. Ships moving in patterns that seemed impossible. Something was definitely happening, but no one could determine what. Inside human space, everything had changed. The loss of Meridian Falls had done something unprecedented to humanity. For the first time in their history, every human faction agreed on something. Every nation, corporation, colony, and independent settlement united behind a single purpose. Political differences were set aside. Economic competition was forgotten. Religious disagreements became irrelevant. Old hatreds were buried. Humanity became one. The transformation began with a gathering. Leaders from every human world met in a secret location. Presidents and prime ministers, corporate executives and colony governors, military commanders and scientific directors, religious leaders and philosophical teachers. They all came together. They did not argue. They did not debate old conflicts. They talked about Meridian Falls. They talked about 4.7 million people forced from their homes while the galaxy watched. And did nothing, then they made a decision. The Kryn Empire had used the law as a weapon. They had found a loophole and exploited it without mercy. The Galactic Arbiters had allowed this because the law was technically followed. If the law could not protect the innocent, then the law was broken. If the Arbiters would not fix it, then humanity would fix it themselves. But first, humanity needed to be strong enough to force change. They needed to become something the galaxy could not ignore. They needed power that could not be denied. Not every human world contributed to what came next. Factories that had produced consumer goods switched to military production. Research facilities that had competed with each other began sharing data freely. Scientists who had spent careers protecting patents now published their discoveries openly. Military forces from different nations started training together. Resources flowed to wherever they were needed, most without concern for profit or politics. The numbers were staggering. Industrial output increased by 4,000%. Research programs that should have taken decades were completed in months. Technologies that existed only in theory became reality through unprecedented cooperation. Humanity discovered what they could accomplish when every person worked toward the same goal. The breakthrough came from a team of quantum physicists on New Terra. They had been studying ways to manipulate space-time fabric. The theory was old, but practical application had always been impossible. It required energy levels that no single nation or corporation could generate. But with all of humanity working together, suddenly it became possible. They called it quantum displacement technology. It allowed objects to move through space without actually traveling through the space between. A ship could be at point A, then instantly exist at point B without crossing the distance. No faster than light travel was needed. The ship simply stopped existing in one location and started existing in another. The military applications were obvious. But humanity developed something more. They learned how to weaponize the manipulation of space-time itself. They created devices that could compress space into incredibly dense points. They built tools that could expand space until matter tore apart. They designed systems that could freeze time in limited areas or accelerate it beyond normal flow. These weapons broke every rule. The galaxy thought they understood about physics. They operated at the edge of what reality allowed. Human engineers pushed boundaries that other species did not even know existed. They were motivated by memory. They remembered homes left behind. They remembered children crying as they were forced onto evacuation ships. They remembered the arbiters ruling that law mattered more than justice. The work continued for 2 years. Human shipyards constructed vessels designed specifically for the new technologies. These were not exploration ships or cargo transports. They were weapons platforms. Each one carried enough power to threaten an entire fleet. Humanity built thousands of them. Training programs were established across all human worlds. Soldiers learned to operate the new systems. Pilots practiced maneuvers that would have been impossible before quantum displacement. Strategists developed tactics that assumed capabilities the galaxy had never seen. Everyone prepared for what was coming. The Kryn Empire continued to prosper during this time. They had settled Meridian Falls with their own people. They had renamed it and claimed it as an ancient Kryn territory now properly restored. They used the same legal tactics on two other species, claiming small territories through technical loopholes. The Galactic Arbiters approved these claims as well. The system was working exactly as the Kryn wanted. Then strange reports started coming in. Kryn patrol ships near human borders reported brief sensor contacts. Human vessels appeared for just moments before vanishing. They were not attacking. They were not communicating. They simply appeared as if they were testing something, then disappeared again. The Kryn commanders dismissed these reports. Probably sensor glitches. Certainly nothing to worry about, but the sightings increased. Human ships were being spotted throughout the region. They never stayed long enough for detailed scans. They never responded to hails. They just appeared and vanished like ghosts. The pattern suggested reconnaissance. Someone was gathering information. Someone was preparing for something. The Galactic Arbiters attempted to investigate. They sent probes into human space to determine what was happening. The probes were immediately detected and disabled, not destroyed. Simply shut down and sent drifting back across the border. The message was clear. Stay out. The Arbiters tried to use their emergency powers. These were ancient authorities that allowed them to freeze dangerous situations in stasis. They have used these powers to stop wars and prevent disasters for thousands of years. They activated the stasis protocols targeting human space. Nothing happened. The fields reached toward human territory and simply stopped. Something was blocking them. Something was preventing the Arbiters from exercising their most fundamental power. This had never happened before. The Arbiters had maintained order for 15,000 years. Their authority had never been challenged. Their power had never been blocked. Species across the galaxy began to feel genuine fear. If humanity could resist the Arbiters, what else could they do? The answer came 3 weeks later. Human ships began moving. Thousands of vessels left human space in perfect coordination. They did not announce their intentions. They did not file flight plans. They simply emerged from the borders and set course toward Kryn territory. The galaxy held its breath and waited to see what humanity had become during 2 years of silence. Ambassador Marcus Chen broke humanity's silence with a single transmission. His face appeared on screens across civilized space. He looked older. His hair was completely gray now, but his eyes were clear and determined. He spoke in a calm voice that somehow carried more weight than any threat. The Stellar Accord failed to protect my people. The law was used as a weapon against the innocent. We asked for justice and were given legal technicalities. So humanity withdrew to consider our options. Now we have decided. The system will change. Those who harmed us will answer for their actions. And the galaxy will learn that some wrongs cannot be hidden behind paperwork. The transmission ended. The human fleet continued its advance. The Kryn Empire scrambled to respond. They called for emergency sessions. They invoked ancient treaties. They demanded the Arbiters take action. But the Arbiters had already tried and failed. For the first time in 15,000 years, they were powerless. The reckoning was coming. And nothing in the galaxy could stop it. The reckoning and New Dawn, the Kryn Empire controlled 47 major military installations throughout their territory. Orbital fortresses protected key worlds. Shipyards constructed their fleets. Communication hubs coordinated their forces. Defense platforms guarded strategic locations. Each installation was considered impregnable. Each one had repelled attacks in the past. The Kryn had built their military infrastructure over thousands of years. They believed it was unbreakable. Humanity proved them wrong in 72 hours. The human fleet did not approach slowly. They did not send warnings or issue challenges. They simply appeared. At exactly the same moment, human ships materialized at all 47 installations simultaneously. The quantum displacement technology allowed them to bypass every defensive perimeter. One instant, the installations were secure. The next instant, human vessels were already in firing position. The Kryn commanders barely had time to understand what was happening before the attacks began. But these were not the attacks they expected. Human weapons did not fire explosive projectiles or energy beams. They fired something far more terrifying. Space itself became a weapon dot at the fortress protecting Kryn Prime. Reality twisted. A human weapon created a compression field around the station's weapon systems. Space contracted into an impossibly small point. Metal and energy were crushed into dense spheres no larger than a marble. The fortress weapons simply ceased to exist. The structure remained intact. The crew was unharmed, but every gun, every missile, every defensive system was gone dot at the Viridian shipyards. Human ships deployed a different weapon. This one expanded space between molecular bonds. The shipyard's hulls remained solid, but every electronic system suddenly found its components separated by vast distances. Circuits could not complete. Power could not flow. The entire facility went dark without a single explosion. 300 partially completed warships became useless shells of metal floating in space dot at the communication hub near the Threshold Nebula. Humanity demonstrated another innovation. They created a localized time dilation field. Everything inside the field experienced time at 1/10 normal speed. Kryn operators watched in horror as their hands moved like they were swimming through thick liquid. Emergency signals took minutes to send. By the time they could react to anything, the human attack was already finished. The pattern repeated at every installation. Human forces struck with precision and overwhelming technological advantage. They disabled military capabilities completely. But they went to extraordinary lengths to avoid civilian casualties. Evacuation warnings were broadcast before each strike. Escape pods were allowed to depart freely. Medical facilities were never targeted. Residential sections remained untouched. This was not mindless destruction. This was surgical dismantling of military power while preserving innocent lives. The Kryn had taken human homes. Humanity took Kryn military strength. But where the Kryn had scattered families across the galaxy, humanity ensured that Kryn civilians could watch safely from rescue ships. As their government's weapons were methodically erased, the Kryn military tried to respond. They launched counterattacks from installations that had not yet been hit. Their fleets were formidable. Their commanders were experienced. Their warriors were trained and disciplined. None of it mattered. Human ships moved in ways that made tracking impossible. They appeared, struck, and vanished before return fire could be coordinated. Kryn weapons hit empty space where human vessels had been microseconds earlier. One Kryn admiral managed to concentrate 15 battleships around a critical command station. He created overlapping fields of fire with no gaps. He stationed ships at every possible approach vector. He felt confident this position could not be breached. Human ships appeared inside his defensive perimeter, not near it, not breaking through it, simply inside it, as if they had always been there. His entire fleet was disabled in 4 minutes. The galactic arbiters watched these events unfold with growing alarm. They called emergency sessions. They demanded humanity cease hostilities immediately. They threatened sanctions and isolation. Ambassador Marcus Chin responded with a simple message. We will stop when the Kryn military can no longer threaten anyone. Not before. Species across the galaxy watched the conflict. Some were horrified by humanity's display of force. Others were fascinated by the technology being demonstrated. A few quietly wondered if humanity might be willing to help them with their own problems. Everyone recognized that the balance of power had shifted dramatically. On the 3rd day, the Kryn Empire collapsed. Their military was completely disabled. Their government facilities were surrounded by human ships. Their leadership had no options left. The High Council sent a surrender offer. They agreed to any terms humanity demanded. They just wanted the attacks to stop. Ambassador Chun returned to the Stellar Accord chambers. He had not set foot in that building for 2 years. Now he walked through corridors filled with representatives from hundreds of species. They watched him pass in silence. Some looked afraid. Others looked curious. All of them understood that something fundamental had changed. The chamber was filled when he entered. Every species sent representatives. The galactic arbiters sat in their elevated positions, looking uncertain for the first time in their long existence. Ambassador Chen stood in the center of the floor, where he had stood 2 years ago. When the law failed his people, he began speaking without preamble. 2 years ago, I stood here and watched the law be used as a weapon. The Kryn found a loophole. The arbiters ruled in their favor. 4.7 million humans lost their homes. We asked for justice. We were given legal technicalities. He activated a holographic display. Data filled the air above the chamber floor. During our silence, we researched the entire legal database. We found 347 similar cases over the past 1,000 years. 347 times when powerful species used loopholes to harm weaker ones. 347 times when the arbiters ruled based on technical correctness rather than justice. Representatives shifted uncomfortably. Some recognized cases involving their own species. The arbiters remained silent. Ambassador Chen continued. The system is broken. Law should protect the innocent and punish the guilty. Your system protects the clever and punishes the unlucky. This will change. He presented a new framework. Humanity had spent 2 years not just building weapons, but also rewriting the entire foundation of galactic law. The new system closed every loophole. It prioritized protection of civilians above all else. It created clear definitions that could not be twisted. It established oversight for the arbiters themselves. It gave victims the right to appeal. It made justice more important than technicalities. The document was comprehensive. Legal scholars had worked alongside scientists and engineers during the 2 years of silence. While weapons were being built, laws were being perfected. Humanity had prepared for both war and peace. This is the Sentinel Protocol, Ambassador Chen said. You can adopt it voluntarily, or we will enforce it. Those are your only options. The chamber erupted. Representatives argued. Some called this extortion. Others pointed out that humanity had just demonstrated the power to enforce anything they wanted. A few species quietly agreed that the reforms were actually reasonable. The debate lasted for hours. The lead arbiter finally spoke. You are threatening the entire Accord. You are demanding we abandon 15,000 years of legal tradition. This is unacceptable? Ambassador Chun looked at the ancient being without fear. Your tradition failed my people. Your tradition allowed genocide hidden behind paperwork. Your tradition protects the strong and abandons the weak. Yes, we are demanding you abandon it. Because it deserves to be abandoned. The vote took 3 days. Species caucused and debated. They calculated risks and benefits. They considered what humanity might do if they refused. Some genuinely believed the reforms were good. Others simply recognized that resistance was futile. In the end, the vote was unanimous. The Sentinel Protocol replaced the old Concordat. The Kryn faced justice under the new system. Every official who had authorized the seizure of Meridian Falls was tried in courts that humanity helped establish. The trials were fair. Evidence was examined carefully. But the verdicts were clear. Those responsible were punished appropriately. The Kryn species as a whole was not condemned. Only those who had made the decisions paid the price. Humanity did something else that surprised the galaxy. They established the Guardian Fleet. This was a military force dedicated to protecting species who could not protect themselves. Any world threatened by legal manipulation or military aggression could request Guardian assistance. Humanity would investigate. If the threat was real, humanity would intervene. The displaced humans returned to Meridian Falls. The Kryn colonists were relocated peacefully to other worlds. Buildings that had stood empty were filled with families again. Children played in parks that had been silent. Life returned to the world that had been stolen. Ambassador Chen retired after the new system was established. He moved to a small house in the mountains of Meridian Falls. He grew a garden. He watched sunsets over valleys he thought he would never see again. He visited a memorial built for the sacrifice of silence. It honored every human who had worked during those 2 years to build something better. Other species learned quickly. They taught their children about Meridian Falls. They explained what happened when law became divorced from justice. They made sure every generation understood that humanity had the power to enforce fairness and the wisdom to use that power carefully. The Kryn changed over time. Their new generations grew up learning about their government's mistake. They understood the price of cruelty. They became advocates for the Sentinel Protocol. They worked to prove that species could learn from failure. The galaxy became different. Not perfect. Not paradise. But better. The law now protected everyone. Loopholes were closed. The arbiters answered to oversight councils. Victims had voices. Justice mattered more than technicalities. Humanity returned to being quiet members of the galactic community. They traded and explored. They built and created. They made friends with dozens of species. Most found them pleasant and hardworking. But every species also remembered what happened when humanity was pushed too far in the stellar core chambers. A new inscription was added to the walls. It was written in every language of every member species. The words were simple, but carried weight that everyone understood. Justice cannot be denied. Mercy can be earned. Choose wisely. Humanity hoped they would never need to demonstrate their fury again. They hoped the lesson had been learned permanently. The Guardian fleet remained ready. The quantum displacement technology remained operational. The weapons that could reshape reality remained in storage, just in case the galaxy forgot comments for next part.